Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Channel Zero, Season 1 and Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story, titled Candle Cove, begins with a TV channel interviewing a child psychologist named Mike. He's on the show to promote his new book. Through the conversation between the host and Mike, we learn that in 1988, 5 children went missing in Mike's hometown. Later, the bodies of 4 of the children were found, but 1 child remains missing to this day. The missing child was none other than Mike's twin brother, Eddie. They were both 12 years old at the time. After the incident, Mike's mother sent him to live with relatives, and he hasn't returned home since. During the interview, the host hands Mike a phone and asks him to take a call. The caller is a 12-year-old boy whose family is also going through some difficulties. As a psychologist, Mike is expected to provide some guidance, but he immediately senses something unsettling. Just as he's about to refuse, the host goes ahead and connects the call. Reluctantly, Mike starts talking to the boy on the other end of the line. After introducing himself, Mike hears an eerie laugh and the boy asks him why he's afraid to go home. This clearly unnerves Mike, and he quickly hangs up. Suddenly, everything around him seems to freeze. When Mike snaps out of it, he realizes it was all just an illusion. Back at home, Mike grows increasingly uneasy and begins to experience psychological distress. He even unconsciously carves the words "Mike, come home" into his hormone-let-go arm. Eventually, Mike decides it's time to return to his hometown and uncover the truth. On the drive home, Mike reminisces about the happy times he shared with his brother Eddie. His mother is surprised and delighted by his sudden return, but she's also curious about the real reason for his visit. It's clear that Mike has come back to investigate what happened to his twin brother and the 4 murdered children. Mike's first stop is the local police station, where he meets the sheriff and another officer who both recognize him. They were childhood friends. Mike asks to review the case files on the 4 murdered children, a case that dates back 26 years. Although the children's bodies were found, some of their teeth were missing. The sheriff questions why Mike suddenly wants to look into this old case, and Mike claims it's for his new book. It's obvious he's lying. From their conversation, it's hinted that the sheriff's wife, Jessica, once had a special relationship with Mike. The sheriff invites Mike to a gathering at his house that evening, where the families of the victims will be present. With no way out, Mike reluctantly agrees to attend. As night falls, Mike arrives at the sheriff's home. The guests gather around the dining table, enjoying dinner and conversation. During the meal, Mike reminisces about his childhood, particularly a lengthy card game he once played with his brother, which lasted for days without a winner. The group also chats about the TV shows they used to watch back then. Excusing himself to use the restroom, Mike passes through the hallway and notices a little girl watching Daniel CC Movie Channel. The show seems to be a puppet program, and Mike realizes this is the sheriff's daughter. The sheriff also has a son. Mike greets the little girl, but she responds strangely, warning him to stay quiet because it has left. Just then, the TV suddenly turns off by itself. Curious, Mike asks the girl what she was watching. Returning to the dining room, Mike asks the group if they remember Candle Cove. At the mention of the name, the room falls silent. From their conversation, we learn that the show aired for just 2 months in September and October of 1988. Mike then asks the sheriff how his daughter could possibly know about this show, especially since she claims to have watched it. Jessica reveals that Candle Cove was the source of her nightmares, particularly because of the creepy puppets. It wasn't just her nightmare, it haunted others as well. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Mike decides to leave the gathering. As Mike walks home alone, memories of his childhood flood back. He recalls how he and Eddie were often bullied by a local thug. On one occasion, the thug even broke Eddie's finger. As Mike tried to comfort his brother, they were both suddenly distracted by a strange puppet show on TV. The show was Candle Cove. The next day, a defiant Eddie insisted on confronting the thug again. This time, the thug set his vicious dog on the brothers, but to Mike's surprise, Eddie managed to make the dog obey him and scare the dog shit out of the dog. Back in the present, Mike returns home and prepares for bed. Just as he lies down, the TV turns on by itself. When he gets up to check, he hears someone calling his name. Turning around, he is shocked to see a skeleton figure. The scene abruptly shifts to the morning, with Mike standing outside his house. It turns out he had been sleepwalking. His mother mentions that Eddie also used to sleepwalk. As they talk, Mike notices someone watching him from the woods. Meanwhile, the sheriff's daughter goes missing, and the whole town starts searching for her. Mike joins the search, but the townspeople begin to suspect a connection between the girl's disappearance and Mike's return. During a tense conversation, Jessica confronts Mike, revealing that he had just been discharged from a mental hospital before coming back to town. This, combined with Mike's late return home the previous night, raises further suspicion. When Jessica momentarily turns away, Mike suddenly vanishes, making him seem even more guilty. Mike reappears at the sheriff's house where he questions the sheriff's son about his sister's whereabouts. The boy cryptically replies, "Crow's Nest Mountain." Mike immediately heads to the mountain, the place where the bodies of the missing children were found years ago. There, Mike encounters the same skeletal figure, which leads him to the cliff where the children had died. Sure enough, he finds the missing girl there. As Mike prepares to leave with the girl, a grotesque creature, covered in teeth, emerges from behind a rock and collects the teeth the girl had dropped. After safely returning the girl to the police station, Mike realizes that the person who had been watching him was none other than another officer at the station, someone who was also a relative of one of the murdered children. Mike decides it's time to pack up and leave town. As he prepares to go, his mother comes to say goodbye. They talk about their childhood memories of watching Candle Cove, but to Mike's shock, his mother tells him there was never a show called Candle Cove. She says that he and Eddie would often sit in front of the TV, but all they ever watched was static. Mike is left completely baffled. That night, as Mike drives home, he stops at a motel to rest. In the middle of the night, his phone rings. A voice on the other end asks Mike where he's going, and their show has only just begun. After helping the little girl, Mike planned to head home. But that night, something horrifying occurred at the sheriff's house. The girl they found suddenly attacked her brother with a metal hook in the middle of the night. Sensing that something was seriously wrong, Jessica called Mike again, asking him to come over. Mike returned to his mother's house where their conversation at the door set the stage for what's to come. Mike mentioned that some force was compelling the girl to hurt others, and he vowed to stop it while his mother promised to help him. Mike then visits the hospital to check on Jessica's daughter. While walking down the hallway, he notices a child's drawing that resembles scenes from Candle Cove. Clearly, some children must have seen the show. Otherwise, how could they have drawn something from a program that aired more than 20 years ago? The drawing was done by none other than Jessica's daughter. Mike takes the drawing and chats with the girl, asking her who led her to the cliff. The girl tells him it was a boy who had been underground for a long time, saying he has to go inside for a check. As they continue talking, the girl suddenly transforms into the image of Mike's missing brother, Eddie, and asks if Mike really doesn't remember. Just then, the girl's father enters, asking Mike to step outside for a talk. After Mike leaves, the tooth-covered creature seen earlier sneaks into the girl's hospital room. Back at his mother's house, Mike receives a call from his daughter. The little girl seems sweet and well-behaved, but during their conversation, she appears to be distracted by something in a nearby room. She tells Mike the same thing the girl at the hospital said, telling him that he has to go inside for a check. Mike is stunned. After a brief pause, his daughter goes back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Realizing that something is seriously wrong, Mike becomes increasingly alarmed. Meanwhile, Mike's mother returns from her investigation into the Candle Cove show. She notices the drawing Mike brought back from the hospital and recognizes the railroad tracks depicted in it. From the beginning, the conversations between Mike and his mother have been cryptic, hinting at a shared secret, something related to Mike's twin brother. Driven by this revelation, the two head to an abandoned railroad in town where they have a heated argument. Mike's mother insists that she sent him away years ago to protect him. At the end of the tracks, they find an old, derelict factory, a place where Mike and Eddie used to play as children. They spot a young boy entering the factory, and Mike, following the sound of the boy's voice, finds himself in a dark room. The boy is none other than Eddie. As Mike ventures deeper into the room, he suddenly comes upon a mummified corpse with a horrifying expression, surrounded by candles. The sight triggers fragmented memories for Mike. He recalls someone stabbing Eddie with a hook. Shocked, Mike reports the discovery to the police. The sheriff arrives with a large team, and the corpse is soon identified as Eddie, the brother who went missing decades ago. Back home, Mike's mother is devastated. A blonde woman visits to comfort her. Later that night, as Mike lies in bed, memories of his childhood and Candle Cove flood his mind. Overwhelmed, Mike decides to confess to his mother. He was the one who killed his twin brother. He admits that after the murder, he buried Eddie's body in the woods, but he has no idea who later unearthed it. Mike's mother refuses to hear anymore, wanting to forget the past. When Mike tries to make her listen, she slashes his hand with a knife. That evening, the sheriff arrives to take Mike in for questioning, claiming his mother has spoken to the police about something important. Mike reluctantly gets into the car. On the other side of the town, the blonde woman who had appeared at Mike's house earlier was feeding that toothy monster with her own teeth. At the same time, many families' TVs around town were broadcasting the eerie puppet show Candle Cove, and all the children were watching, completely mesmerized. Turning back to Mike, instead of taking him to the station, the sheriff drives to an empty house. It turns out, Mike's mother hadn't reported anything to the police. The sheriff suspects that Mike was involved in the murders of the children over 20 years ago. Others share his suspicions, including the officer who had been watching Mike earlier. All three lost relatives in the murders, and they are determined to get the truth from Mike. Under intense pressure, Mike recounts what happened all those years ago. His brother Eddie had killed the local thug. Following Eddie's instructions, Mike lured the thug to Crow's Nest Mountain. Once there, the thug inexplicably fell under Eddie's control. He pulled out his own teeth and handed them to Eddie, who then told the thug he could go to Candle Cove now. So the thug proceeded to jump off the cliff to his death, which shocked Mike a lot. The three listeners are stunned by Mike's story, finding it hard to believe. One of them, a bald officer, becomes convinced that Mike is lying and that he was responsible for all the murders. He suspects that Mike's mother sent him away to protect him from facing justice. In a fit of rage, the bald officer draws his gun, intending to kill Mike. A struggle ensues between the officer and the sheriff, during which the gun accidentally goes off, wounding Mike. The sheriff manages to subdue the officer. At that moment, Mike's mother arrives with Jessica, the sheriff's wife, who had been helping her search for Mike. They find Mike being held against his will, and the bald officer and the other vigilante flee the scene. Mike is taken into custody by another police officer, who can't believe that the sheriff would be involved in such a scheme. Although Mike's injuries are minor, he is taken to the hospital for treatment. The officer asks Mike to explain what happened, and he once again brings up the Candle Cove. He insists that the show influenced the children all those years ago and that it's happening again now. According to Mike, Eddie was the one who killed the 4 children. The officer is skeptical but recalls a disturbing sight she had witnessed while on patrol: 4 children stabbing a mannequin repeatedly. However, with no concrete proof that Candle Cove ever existed, she leaves the hospital, unsure of what to believe. The scene shifts to the blonde woman who had visited Mike's mother earlier. She's revealed to be a teacher, and as a young woman she suffered from a condition resembling epilepsy. This teacher, who was once Mike's teacher as well, has a dark side. The young woman involved in Mike's abduction seeks refuge at the teacher's home, but instead of safety, she meets a gruesome fate. The teacher stabs her in the throat with a hook, warning her that she should never have crossed him. The woman isn't the only victim. The bald officer who shot at Mike is also killed and sent to heaven by none other than the teacher's 4 students, the same children the officer had seen earlier. After committing the murders, the 4 students return to the teacher's house. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Mike, who returns to his mother's home after receiving treatment at the hospital. In the middle of the night, Mike is shocked to find his daughter, Lily, in the house. He is terrified, knowing that his mother's house is hundreds of miles from where his family lives. To make matters worse, the tooth-covered creature is watching them from upstairs. Mike stared in shock at his daughter. He anxiously asks how she got there, but Lily has no idea what happened. Mike immediately calls his wife, who is away on a trip, to tell her that Lily is with him. His wife is equally stunned, as she had not arranged for Lily to visit. The next morning, Jessica hears that Mike's daughter is in town and brings over some clothes for her. At this point, the episode flashes back to Mike and Jessica's childhood. They were very close friends, even having romantic feelings for each other, often showing their affection in front of Eddie. When Jessica meets Lily, the little girl surprises her by saying she already knows Jessica. Jessica asks politely if Lily likes dolls, but Lily responds that she prefers pirates. She then retrieves a pirate toy from a hidden compartment in the room, behavior that seems entirely unlike Mike's daughter. Mike, suspicious, asks who she really is. Lily, or rather the entity within her, says that he knows who he is. Mike then asks where Lily is, referring to her soul. Lily unsettlingly replies that she's in the dream. Mike and Lily begin playing the same card game that Mike once played with Eddie, making it clear that the spirit possessing Lily is Eddie. Through their conversation, Eddie, speaking through Lily, tells Mike that he is trapped and needs Mike's help. If Mike burns Eddie's mummified corpse, Eddie's spirit will be freed. Mike explains Eddie's request to Jessica, flashing back to their childhood again. During that time, Mike and Jessica were very close. Once, when Mike went to meet Jessica, she asked why he wasn't waiting for her at Crow's Nest Mountain, as they had planned. Mike realized that Eddie had likely set a trap for Jessica and rushed to stop it. Before leaving, Mike told Jessica how to distinguish between him and Eddie. Eddie had 2 extra teeth in his upper jaw. Mike reached Crow's Nest Mountain just in time to find Eddie waiting for Jessica with a hook. The brothers argued, and Mike managed to wrest the hook away from Eddie. The scene then shifts to the female officer, who temporarily takes over the sheriff's duty after his arrest. She becomes increasingly suspicious about the old case from over 20 years ago, especially concerning Eddie and Mike. Considering recent events, she decides to investigate the 4 children she saw previously. The officer visits their school and discovers strange symbols on their desks. In the computer lab, she experiences an eerie moment as skull images appear on the monitors she passes, though she doesn't notice them. After some searching, the officer finds the 4 children rehearsing the Candle Cove show. She instructs them to go home immediately. Later, after work, she accepts an invitation for a rendezvous with a colleague from the station. However, as she tries to sleep, she grows increasingly uneasy about the day's events. Unable to shake the feeling that something is wrong, she decides to visit the teacher's house to ask about the children. When she arrives, the house appears empty, but the basement door is open. Venturing downstairs, the officer makes a gruesome discovery: the body of the young woman whose throat the teacher had slit earlier. Meanwhile, Mike and Jessica head to the morgue where they find Eddie's body. Believing that burning the remains will end everything, they take the corpse and set it ablaze. With the task seemingly complete, Jessica prepares to return home. However, as she arrives, she is horrified to encounter several masked figures who are revealed to be the same 4 children the female officer had seen earlier. The children, each wielding a knife, chase Jessica down and stab her to death, echoing the gruesome scene the officer had previously witnessed on the roadside. Inside the house, the teacher watches expressionlessly as the horrific event unfolds. As Jessica is murdered, Mike's daughter suddenly regains consciousness, or rather her own awareness. Shortly after, the police receive a report of Jessica's murder and rush to the scene. The female officer informs Mike about Jessica's death, noting that the footprints at the scene indicate it was children who committed the crime. She also reveals that in the teacher's basement, she found the body of the woman who had previously escaped, along with various Candle Cove props. Mike, who thought everything would end after burning Eddie's body, realizes that the nightmare is far from over. The officer asks Mike to cooperate with the investigation, but at that moment, Mike feels a sharp pain in his mouth. Checking in the mirror, he is shocked to find 2 extra teeth growing in his upper jaw, the very trait that distinguished Eddie from him. Mike goes to the police station, where the officers are baffled by the case. They can't understand why the children killed Jessica, and the teacher and the children have now disappeared. Mike requests to visit the teacher's basement, where he finds an array of Candle Cove props and receives a phone call. The teacher on the line asks Mike to meet her, claiming she has something important to discuss. As Mike and the police investigate, more children in the town begin to exhibit strange behavior under the influence of Candle Cove, leaving their homes and wandering the streets. Following the teacher's instructions, Mike arrives at an abandoned store. Meanwhile, the chubby officer who had hooked up with the female officer earlier is sent to locate Mike. They decide to split up. Unfortunately, the officer is surrounded by a group of children and ultimately killed by the skeletal figure, who is revealed to be the teacher. Mike witnesses the entire event but faints, seemingly under some kind of control. When he regains consciousness, he finds only the officer's lifeless body. With no other options, Mike returns home, only to discover that the teacher is there, holding his mother at gunpoint. The teacher reveals the full story to Mike and his mother. She was once Mike and Eddie's teacher and had a son who was one of the 4 children killed years ago. One day while teaching, she suffered a seizure, likely due to epilepsy, right in front of Eddie. But to her amazement, Eddie somehow used his mind to cure her. From that moment on, the teacher became a devoted follower of Eddie. In her twisted quest to increase Eddie's power, she even sacrificed her own son, trying to revive Eddie and his power. Despite all her efforts, she realized that nothing was as effective as Mike's presence, which greatly amplified Eddie's abilities, likely due to their bond as twins. Now, Eddie is ready to return, and he wants to take over Mike's body. The teacher asks Mike if he can feel Eddie's presence, indicated by the growth of the extra teeth. The teacher leaves, but Mike refuses to give in to Eddie's influence. Eddie sends another warning, causing Mike to hallucinate. In his vision, his daughter Lily reappears in the house, surrounded by even more terrifying creatures. Mike sees himself in the mirror as a young Eddie, holding the iron hook, and watches in horror as he kills his daughter. His mother manages to pull him out of the hallucination, and in a desperate act of defiance, Mike pulls out the teeth that symbolize Eddie's presence. Just then, the television in the room switches on by itself, even though it wasn't plugged in. Once again, it displays scenes from Candle Cove, but this time, Lily is inside the show, pleading for help. Eddie traps Mike in another hallucination, this time within Mike's own mind. In this mental world, Mike learns that Eddie always had a dark side, which was unleashed after the thug and his friends broke Eddie's finger. Because of their twin bond, this darkness became incredibly powerful. Eddie then transforms into a monstrous creature made of teeth and attacks Mike. When Mike snaps out of the hallucination, he sees his daughter on the TV still crying out for help. He tells his mother that Lily is trapped in the darkness Eddie created, and the only way to save her is to enter Eddie's world. Despite the pain of their past, Mike asks his mother for help, hoping she can assist him in this final confrontation with his brother. At this moment, Mike's wife arrives, determined to find their daughter. The couple heads to Crow's Nest Mountain, the place where Mike killed Eddie. Sure enough, they find Lily lying there. Mike's wife also sees the creature, which Mike explains is Eddie's manifestation. He tells her to take Lily and leave immediately if she wakes up. Mike then approaches the creature, his brother Eddie in monstrous form. The tooth-covered creature attacks Mike, seemingly entering his body. Mike suddenly awakens within Eddie's twisted mental world, a nightmarish landscape where he sees not only the 4 children who died years ago, but also various demonic figures from Candle Cove. He eventually finds Eddie in a room lined with human skin with a flayed creature by his side. In this room, Mike spots a TV showing the outside world where Lily lies unconscious. Mike manages to reach Lily and pleads with Eddie to let them go, but Eddie insists that only Lily can leave. Mike must stay. Mike tells his daughter that everything happening is real, not a dream, and warns her never to listen if Eddie calls to her again. He whispers something in her ear, ensuring her safety. Reluctantly, Mike agrees to Eddie's deal. Lily crawls into the TV and regains consciousness in the real world. With his wife and daughter safely away, Mike feels some relief. Meanwhile, Eddie, still shrouded in darkness, tries to use the TV to enter Mike's body. But Mike challenges Eddie to finish the card game they started as children, a game that never ended because Mike cheated. This challenge is a stalling tactic, buying time for his daughter, who has returned to her grandmother's house. Lily embraces her grandmother and whispers something in her ear, Mike's secret instructions. As planned, the grandmother begins making her way to Crow's Nest Mountain. Back in the Dark Realm, Mike struggles against Eddie, losing cards one by one. If the game ends, Eddie will take over Mike's body. Time is running out, and Mike's mother must hurry. But on her way to Crow's Nest Mountain, she is ambushed by the teacher, who grievously wounds her with a hook. Just as the teacher is about to finish her off, the female officer arrives and shoots the teacher, giving Mike's mother the chance to strike back and kill her attacker. Injured but determined, Mike's mother stumbles toward Crow's Nest Mountain. Meanwhile, in the Dark Realm, Mike loses his last card, and Eddie prepares to take over his body. The scene cuts to several weeks later. The town has returned to normal, with the female officer now serving as sheriff. She announces to the public that the teacher was responsible for all the murders, including those of the 5 children decades ago. Peace is restored, and life seems to return to normal for Mike's family. At home, Lily is drawing a picture of her father holding her hand, surrounded by darkness, but they are bathed in light. Suddenly, the TV flickers to life, showing Candle Cove again. But just as it starts, Mike walks in and turns off the TV. Lily smiles at her father, but when her mother calls her out of the room and the camera returns to the TV, Mike is gone. What happened? Let's rewind to the day of the final confrontation. After Lily was rescued, she whispered something to her grandmother. Later, as Mike's mother found his body on Crow's Nest Mountain, she tearfully suffocated him, killing her son to prevent Eddie from taking over. Back in the Dark Realm, Eddie prepares to enter Mike's body, but suddenly realizes he can no longer pass through the TV. This is because their mother had killed Mike's physical body, trapping both brothers in the darkness forever. It turns out, the whispered message Mike had Lily deliver to his mother was to kill him, the only way to stop Eddie from returning. Mike knew that if Eddie were resurrected, countless more lives would be lost. The picture Lily drew symbolized that no matter how dark things got, her father was a beacon of light. The final scene of Candle Cove playing on the TV, with Mike turning it off, represents the ongoing struggle between the brothers, Eddie trying to control the children and Mike fighting to protect them. The season tells the story of twin brothers who were often bullied by the local troublemakers in their town. Eddie, the older brother, developed a dark power, possibly innate, that allowed him to create the Candle Cove show, which he used to influence and control children. This power led to the deaths of many innocent kids, and along the way, Eddie gained a devoted follower in their teacher. However, when Eddie discovered that his brother Mike liked a girl, he became jealous and targeted her. Unable to accept this, Mike accidentally killed Eddie and buried his body. The murders of the town's children caused widespread panic, prompting their mother to send Mike away to live elsewhere. Decades later, Mike, still haunted by the past, returns to the town, only to find that the darkness has followed him back. In the end, Mike realizes that everything was Eddie's doing, and his brother's ultimate goal was to take over Mike's body. To protect his daughter, Mike chooses to trap both himself and Eddie in the dark world Eddie created, sacrificing his life to prevent his brother from wreaking further havoc. The second story, titled The No-End House, begins in a typical American small town, where a terrified woman seems to be fleeing from something. She spots a black house at the end of an empty street and desperately runs toward it. However, a man catches up to her, violently shoving her to the ground, knocking her unconscious. We see that the woman has "This isn't real" written on her arm, and the man is trying to erase the words. The scene then shifts to the protagonist, Margot, who has a close friend named Jules. Margot's life is upended by the sudden death of her father. When Jules returns from her summer vacation, she tries to cheer Margot up, knowing it has been some time since her father passed away. Flashbacks reveal that Margot had a close relationship with her father. Jules accepts an invitation from their mutual friend, JD, to attend a party. During the party, both Margot and Jules receive a creepy video on their phones. Jules takes Margot to a local bar to relax, where they meet JD. He has an octopus tattoo on his arm. However, the noisy atmosphere overwhelms Margot, still grieving her father's death, and she prepares to leave. At that moment, a handsome guy named Seth approaches Margot for a hormone chat. JD, noticing this, asks Margot and Jules to show him their phones, as he also received the eerie video. He then shares the story of the No-End House with them. It's said that the No-End House last appeared in the US about 6 years ago and has since been spotted in Eastern Europe and South America. The house always appears and disappears without warning, and those near it receive bizarre texts or videos. Few people understand what's happening. Recently, the No-End House appeared in their town. Rumor has it that the house contains 6 rooms, each more terrifying than the last, designed to prey on people's psyche. The rooms manipulate your mind, and no two people describe their experiences the same way. No one has ever reached the 6th room, or if they have, they didn't come back. Margot and Jules dismiss it as just an elaborate haunted house, full of staged scares. As they continue talking, Margot confides in Seth about her father's death. He died on their living room couch while the TV was still on. Margot blames herself, thinking that if she had returned home earlier that night, her father might still be alive. Afterward, the 4 friends decide to explore the legendary No-End House. When they arrive at the house, they find many people gathered to experience it, including some who have just exited, looking extremely shaken, pale, vomiting, and exhausted. A bearded man with a backpack named Dylan joins Margot's group, as well as a few other expendable characters. Dylan seems calm and knowledgeable about the house, so the group decides to enter together. As they approach the entrance, Margot notices the house's plaque, which reads, "The No-End House is made of wood, cement, and you." Inside the waiting area, someone has scrawled a warning on the door, "Beware of the cannibal." The door to the first room opens, and Dylan enters first. This room is filled with plaster statues, and the group is shocked to realize that the statues resemble each of them. They assume someone took photos of them while they were waiting and used 3D printing to create the statues. A curious young man tries to take a picture, but his phone suddenly dies, along with everyone else's. Only Dylan remains calm, observing the others from a distance. The lights suddenly go out, and when they come back on, the atmosphere in the room has completely changed. The lighthearted music is replaced by distorted, jarring sounds, and the once intact statues are now shattered, with blackened hands tearing them apart. The door to the next room opens, and the group moves forward, though some choose to leave through a nearby exit. Notably, only JD's statue remains untouched. The group enters the second room, a large, empty space with 3 doors, the one they came through, one leading to the next room, and an exit. Suddenly, the lights flicker, and a masked figure appears in the room. The figure shoves JD aside and whispers something to Margot. When the masked figure approaches a sidekick man, the lights go out again. When they come back on, the man is gone, leaving a long trail of blood on the floor. The missing sidekick man's girlfriend, unable to handle the horror, decides to leave through the exit. JD, suspicious, concludes that these people must be plants, actors hired to scare them. Now, only Dylan and the original four remain. Before the door to the next room opens, Dylan warns everyone that they can still turn back. He and JD then lead the way into the third room. Jules asks Margot what the masked figure whispered to her earlier. Margot reveals that he called her childhood nickname and welcomed her back. Jules urges Margot to leave, but Margot is determined to see what lies ahead, so they both enter the third room. The entrance to the third room is a revolving door that only allows one person through at a time. After entering, Margot immediately regrets her decision and wants to turn back, but the door has locked behind her. With no other option, Margot steels herself and moves forward. The room is a long hallway that ends in a large mirror. Earlier, Margot had confided in Jules that one of her childhood fears was encountering a mirror at the end of a narrow hallway. She always felt as if someone might leap out from behind it. Sure enough, a creepy man appears behind the mirror, terrifying Margot. Panicked, she rushes forward, but just as she's about to leave through the exit, she hears Jules calling her from the next room. Reluctantly, Margot enters the fourth room. Inside the fourth room, Margot realizes that Jules isn't there. Instead, there's a giant screen. On it, disturbing images related to her father flash by. After the video ends, the door to the fifth room opens, presenting Margot with a choice: continue into the next room or leave. After a moment of hesitation, Margot decides to push forward and enters the fifth room. To her astonishment, the fifth room is an exact replica of her own living room, complete with a swollen figure sitting on the couch. The TV is playing home videos of Margot as a child with her father. Shocked, Margot wonders how they got these videos. She reaches for the remote in the swollen figure's hand, but to her horror, the figure suddenly comes to life and grabs her. Margot screams in a chicken voice, breaking free and frantically shouting that she wants to go home. She then rushes through a door, not sure whether it leads to the next room or the exit. Margot finally escapes the haunted house. Outside, she finds Jules, both of them looking exhausted. They return to the car, intending to wait for JD and Seth to emerge so they can all go home together. But after waiting a long time, there's still no sign of the others, and the car won't start. Left with no choice, Margot and Jules decide to walk home. After walking for a while, Margot reaches her house. But when she enters, she's stunned to find her father alive, casually asking her how her night was. Completely bewildered, Margot tries to process what's happening. Meanwhile, outside, Jules notices the number 6 on the doorframe of Margot's house. As Jules follows Margot inside, she is shocked to find Margot's father alive and well. This isn't just an illusion, he's really there. As Margot and Jules struggle to make sense of the situation, Margot's father offers to make them breakfast. He asks Margot to fetch some eggs from the fridge. Inside the fridge, there's only 1 carton of eggs. After handing it to her father, Margot puts the empty carton back in the fridge, only to find it has mysteriously refilled itself. It seems that objects in this place can reset infinitely. Additionally, Margot notices that a cyclist outside the window is endlessly looping the same route. Jules pulls Margot aside, realizing the truth: they are still in the no-end house. They never actually left, and this isn't Margot's real home. The man they see isn't Margot's father. Margot, however, already suspected this. She confides in Jules, revealing that she believes her father committed suicide. He died from an allergic reaction to medication, one he knew he was allergic to but took in excess anyway. Now that she has the chance to be with him again, Margot is determined to understand why he took his own life. Jules urges Margot to face reality, leading to a heated argument between the two friends. Eventually, Jules is forced to leave on her own. The scene shifts outside the no-end house, where JD and Seth have also emerged. Seth wants to wait for Margot and Jules, but JD, unnerved by the house, insists on leaving. When JD tries to use his phone, he finds it still won't turn on, so he decides to walk home. After some time, he arrives at his house, only to find a plaque with the number 6 on his door as well. Inside, he encounters a doppelganger of himself. The fake JD invites the real JD inside for a chat, where they discuss their interests. The doppelganger claims that he exists because the real JD is self-centered, and says he will become an improved version of him. Suddenly, the fake JD grabs a bottle and violently kills the real one. Meanwhile, Seth reaches the center of town, where he finds a massive iron cage with a person inside who looks exactly like him. The camera then cuts to Dylan, who has also found his way into this strange world. Dylan tries to start various cars parked along the street, but fails each time. As he inspects the engine of one car, we can see his arm carved with the same words, "This isn't real." He then discovers that it has no engine at all, explaining why none of the cars work, including the one Margot and her friends tried to use earlier. As Dylan walks down the street, he encounters the same woman from the beginning whose name is Lacey. Dylan remarks that she's wearing the same outfit she had on when they first met. Lacey recalls their first meeting, but is quickly interrupted when Dylan pulls out a gun. He coldly states that the outfit she's wearing is still in the closet and then shoots her dead. Dylan sprints to his home and finds someone at the foot of the stairs. It's Lacey again. Dylan tells Lacey that he's there to take her home, but she doesn't recognize him at all. She claims not to know him. Dylan then reveals that 6 years ago, he and Lacey entered the no-end house together. He managed to escape, but Lacey did not. Everything in this place is a fabrication, indicating that Lacey doesn't belong here. Despite this, Lacey insists her husband will return soon. Dylan then reveals that he is actually her husband. The scene shifts to Jules, who has returned to the spot where the no-end house once stood, only to find that the house has vanished. Seth is also there, and Jules shares with him what she experienced earlier. The two decide to find a place to rest for the night. In the middle of the night, Jules is awakened by a strange noise. She follows the sound into another room where she discovers a massive spherical object. As she touches the sphere, it begins to change, revealing a shadowy figure inside. Meanwhile, back with Margot, eerie events continue to unfold. Margot's father takes her to the basement pool. When she dives in, she discovers that the pool is bottomless. Later that night, as Margot sleeps, her father enters her room and places his hand on her head. This triggers a series of flashbacks to memories of Margot's mother. At the same time, a bloodstain appears in the basement, gradually taking the shape of Margot's mother. As the image of her mother in Margot's memory fades, the bloodstain solidifies into a human form. Her father then enters the basement, tears off one of her mother's arms, and begins to eat it but spares her smelly part. The next morning, Margot wakes up in her room. When she opens her closet, she is startled to see the same eerie blue glow she saw in the pool. It becomes clear that the elements in the sixth room are partly shaped by the thoughts of those who enter, reflecting their deepest fears or memories. For Margot, the pool and the closet likely represent dark, frightening places from her childhood. Downstairs, her father is once again preparing breakfast as if nothing has changed. Margot feels like something is missing. Her father reassures her that he loves her and has returned for her. Margot is touched by his words, but as she clears the table and opens the trash bin, she finds her mother's skinned face inside. Her memories of her mother become increasingly vague and abstract. Horrified, Margot tries to escape, but her father blocks her path. With no other option, Margot retreats to her room, aware that her father knows she has discovered her mother's remains. Trapped, Margot attempts to escape through the window, but it's sealed shut, no matter how hard she tries to break it. Meanwhile, Jules' encounter with the mysterious sphere causes it to drain her memories, and a figure resembling her sister emerges from a pool of blood. The figure inside the sphere then consumes this manifestation. The following morning, the fake JD, having killed and burned the real one, tracks down Jules and Seth. Everyone believes he is the real JD. The three discuss finding Margot and escaping together. However, the fake JD's arm begins to peel where his octopus tattoo is located, a detail that Seth notices but keeps to himself. Seth's wary glances suggest that he too is hiding something. On the other side, Dylan has tied up Lacey and shows her old photos, trying to jog her memory. However, she has no recollection of him. At that moment, the imagined version of her husband returns. It's Dylan in the suit from the beginning. The real Dylan then kills his doppelganger. To clarify the plot, here's a breakdown. Many people have entered the sixth room, but they can't escape because they are trapped by the entities they've created. Once inside, people manifest what they long for most, and these manifestations gain control over the real individuals. These entities feed on human memories, and the longer someone stays in the house, the more they lose their grip on reality. For example, Margot's father consumed her memories of her mother, making those memories increasingly distorted and abstract. For example, consider Lacey. Based on earlier events, she's been trapped in this world for 6 years. She tried to escape, this was shown at the beginning of the story, but the entities here won't allow the real people to leave because without them, these entities would have no source of sustenance. This ties back to the message written at the entrance of the no-end house. This house is made of wood, cement, and you, and beware of the cannibal. The scene shifts back to Margot. Her father, waiting impatiently outside her door, begins pounding on it, desperate to get in. With no other options, Margot hides in the closet only to find herself suddenly transported to the bottom of the pool. Realizing this, she manages to escape. It becomes clear that both the closet and the pool are connected through the blank spots in Margot's childhood memories, which is why they are linked in her mental world. Margot flees into the street, with her father in close pursuit. Jules and the others spot her and chase after her. Margot runs into a school building where she and Jules finally reunite. With some quick thinking, they manage to evade Margot's father by hiding in a classroom. The four friends, relieved to be together again, retreat to Jules and Seth's room to rest. Through the window, Margot notices a dark shadow looming on the outskirts of town. Curious, she invites Seth to investigate with her. To get a better view, they climb to the top of the town's water tower. From there, Margot sees the no-end house, not far from the town. Just as she starts to feel hopeful about finding an exit, she is horrified to see her father has tracked them down. The group sets a trap and successfully lures him into a pit. After returning, they are joined by Dylan, who arrives with his wife Lacey. The group is finally complete. Dylan explains that the longer they stay in this place, the more they lose their sanity. They must leave as soon as possible. The group agrees to set out for the no-end house at first light to find the exit. That night, Margot seeks out Seth, and the two share a fast moment of intimacy before their attempted escape. Meanwhile, in the basement, Jules encounters the mysterious sphere again. The entity inside the sphere frantically absorbs more of her memories. The scene then cuts to the next morning. Seth, just waking up, goes downstairs and finds JD by the pool. JD's skin is peeling, especially around his octopus tattoo. When Seth asks if he's okay, JD nervously claims it's just an allergy. Seth smiles subtly and says nothing, then returns to bed. Seth and Margot discuss plans to meet again once they return to the real world. But Margot, blinded by love, doesn't realize that something is off about Seth. Meanwhile, Dylan is up early preparing for their journey. Lacey seems to be regaining some clarity, so he unties her, only for her to suddenly stab him. With no choice, he restrains her again. The group gathers their belongings and sets out for the no-end house. Along the way, Margot notices a large iron cage in the town center, containing a family of 4 who seem to recognize Seth. Surrounding the cage are 6 houses. As they leave, the caged family watches them closely, and figures emerge from each house, staring at the group as they pass by. The townspeople's unsettling gazes follow them, and Dylan warns that these people are part of the no-end house, and they just don't want them to leave. On the roadside, a mother calls her child home for dinner, but in this world, dinner means devouring memories. The group finally reaches the edge of the town, followed closely by many of the town's entities. As the entities watch them leave, another figure emerges from the crowd. It's Margot's father. He crosses the boundary and follows them. As they walk, Jules notices a barely alive figure in the bushes. Just as she begins to feel uneasy, Seth explains that this entity is in such a state because its host's memories have been completely consumed, or perhaps because the host is dead. JD looks at the entity in horror, recalling his peeling skin and Seth's earlier remark. The reason for JD's condition now becomes clear. Later, JD confronts Seth privately, asking why Seth didn't expose him when he saw the peeling skin on his arm. JD realizes that Seth isn't just an ordinary person and must be connected to this place somehow. Seth calmly replies that he doesn't care about JD's situation because JD is already doomed. JD, in turn, warns Seth that he's determined to escape the house and will reveal Seth's secret if he tries to stop him. The conversation ends on a tense note, and the group continues their journey. As night falls, the group still hasn't reached the no-end house. Jewel, clearly weakened after having her memories drained by the sphere, becomes increasingly dazed. Finally, the group emerges from the forest to find a vast cornfield known as the Corn Maze. Margot recognizes it as a place her father often took her when she was a child, indicating that this is yet another manifestation of her childhood memories. To reach the no-end house, they must cross this maze, which is filled with ravenous entities. They decide to camp outside the maze and wait until morning to proceed. Dylan lights a campfire, and everyone gathers around it. Seth pulls Margot aside and confesses the truth about himself. He tells her that he arrived in this world years ago and decided to stay. According to Seth, this place isn't as bad as everyone thinks. While it's true that some people don't belong here, for others, it's a happy place. Margot is shocked, wondering if Seth is the one who led her here. Meanwhile, Jules hears a voice calling to her and starts walking back along the path they came from. With no choice, Dylan leaves JD to watch over his wife while he goes after Jules. As soon as he leaves the campfire, the entities from the maze attack, and by the time the group returns to the camp, Lacey has been killed. Devastated, Dylan notices the open wound on JD's arm, realizing that JD is an entity. Seth then exposes the truth that the real JD was killed by this imposter. Margot in turn reveals what she just learned about Seth, that he has been living in this world all along. Dylan, displaying both wisdom and courage, promptly incinerates the fake JD. Dylan then leads Margot and Jules into the corn maze. Although he doesn't kill Seth, Dylan knows he can't be trusted. Deep in the forest, Margot's father watches their every move. Inside the maze, the trio faces numerous challenges as Dylan fights off the entities. Meanwhile, Jules is once again drawn to the mysterious sphere, which continues to drain her memories. Margot finally finds Jules, but they run into her father, who has been searching for her. Although he initially tries to consume Margot's memories, he manages to control himself and tells her to escape. This moment reveals that Margot's father still loves her deep down. In the end, Margot, Jules, and Dylan reunite. Dylan successfully guides them to the entrance of the no-end house, but decides to stay behind to destroy the place once and for all. Margot and Jules enter the house, triggering a fast-track mode as they race through the first 4 rooms. To return to the real world, they must pass through all 5 rooms again. As they passed through the 5th room, Margot once again encountered the bloated figure resembling her father. This time, without hesitation, she and Jules quickly exited through a side door. Margot and Jules finally made it back to the real world. They got into a car and prepared to head home. But what happened to Dylan, who stayed behind in room 6? After seeing them off, he turned and walked into the corn maze, where he encountered Margot's father emerging from it. Dylan drew his knife, ready to attack, but to his surprise, Margot's father overpowered him and strangled him to death. With Dylan out of the way, Margot's father followed the girl's path and entered the no-end house. After Margot and Jules left, he too emerged into the real world. The next morning, back in the real world, Margot called her mother and finally learned the truth about her father's death. It turns out that the family business had lost a lot of money, and her father staged an accidental death to secure a large insurance payout. This would ensure they could keep their home and Margot could afford to go to college. Realizing her father's intentions, Margot felt a deeper sense of guilt. She had blamed herself for his death, thinking it was her fault, but now she knew the truth. Meanwhile, Margot's father, still weak from the injury inflicted by Dylan, followed her to their home, but Margot and Jules were unaware he had escaped the no-end house. Just then, Seth arrived and told Jules that Margot's father had escaped the no-end house and was now in the real world. Taking advantage of the distraction, Margot's father sneaked into the house and began feeding on her memories again, this time targeting the memory of a dog the family once had. He devoured the manifested dog with a disturbing ferocity. The group eventually overpowered him, but they were left with a dilemma. They couldn't keep him, couldn't let him go, and couldn't call the police. If they drove him away, he would just return when he got hungry. For the time being, they locked him in the basement. Seth suggested returning him to the no-end house, but Margot refused. She wanted to kill him once and for all. Margot found the medication her father was allergic to and devised a plan. Meanwhile, in the living room, Seth and Jules discussed Seth's past. He revealed that after entering the no-end house, he discovered the existence of his family, the very people locked in the iron cage they had seen earlier. He couldn't bring himself to kill them, but he also couldn't let them out, so he left them imprisoned. Just then, Jules received another eerie video on her phone, this time showing the mysterious sphere. Confused and disoriented, Jules thought of her own family and decided to leave. When she finally saw them, she realized she had lost all memory of them. Back at Margot's house, she and Seth tricked her father into ingesting a large dose of the allergy medication. He soon had a severe allergic reaction, and they believed he was dead as shit. They planned to drag his body outside, but just as they were about to, Margot's mother arrived. While Margot was figuring out how to explain everything to her mother, her father suddenly sprang back to life. He quickly overpowered both her mother and Seth. To protect Seth, Margot agreed to return to the no-end house with her father. The three of them made their way back to the house, but just as they were leaving, Jules returned to Margot's house and sensed something was wrong. She ran toward the no-end house, but by the time she arrived, it had already vanished, moving on to another place in the world. The scene shifts to a year later. After being taken back to the no-end house, Margot lived with her father, who continued to feed on her memories. But unlike other entities, he wasn't voracious. Margot would willingly offer him small memories, and she meticulously recorded what she forgot each day. Over time, Margot, Seth, and her father settled into a comfortable life within the house. Margot seemed strangely at peace with the situation. However, one morning, while out for a walk, Margot and Seth noticed that parts of the town had changed. Seth suspected that the no-end house had moved to a new location. Meanwhile, in the real world, Jules had spent the past year searching tirelessly for clues about the no-end house. Her persistence finally paid off when she discovered its new location. Determined to find Margot, Jules packed her gear and prepared to enter the house again. The scene felt eerily familiar, as Jules now mirrored Dylan, who had died a year earlier. While waiting in line to enter the house, Jules spotted a familiar face. It's Seth. She seemed to realize something crucial. Together, they entered the town within the no-end house, but Jules was now highly suspicious of Seth. Seth warned her that entities never truly die. As long as their host lives, they survive, though they grow increasingly hungry. When they find their host again, they will consume everything. Jules was visibly shaken by this revelation. With the town's layout altered, Jules has no choice but to follow Seth in her search for Margot. Seth leads Jules to the town center where the 6 houses and the iron cage were previously seen. He explains to Jules that the no-end house is a living organism with its own appetite. The more he learned about it, the more he admired it. Jules realizes that Seth has lost his mind, but before she can react, Seth overpowers her and drags her into a basement inside one of the houses. After dealing with Jules, Seth returns to Margot's house. Ever since Margot discovered that the no-end house had relocated, she has been determined to destroy it. She shares her plan with Seth, but he quickly dismisses it. It's clear that Seth's goal is to control Margot completely, preventing her from either escaping or destroying the house. Seth then approaches Margot's father, urging him to drain more of Margot's memories. However, her father sympathizes with Margot's desire to stop the house and realizes that continuing like this will eventually leave Margot with no memories at all. Meanwhile, in the basement, Jules encounters the mysterious sphere again. Starving from lack of sustenance, the sphere tries to consume Jules entirely. But this time, Jules is no longer the same person she once was. She manages to destroy the sphere and escape. Jules then makes her way to Margot's house, where Margot is shocked to see her. Jules insists that Margot come with her to see something important. The two head to one of the 6 houses in the town center, where Jules uncovers one of Seth's secrets, a girl who, like Margot, was brought there by Seth. However, it's clear that this girl's memories have been completely drained. Margot realizes that she wasn't the only one Seth manipulated. He had other girlfriends as well. Jules instructs Margot to wait while she takes care of something, promising to return so they can escape together. But before she can leave, Seth arrives. Margot confronts him, and Seth tries to justify his actions by claiming that she was the only one he truly cared about. However, just as he tries to defend himself, women start emerging from each of the 6 houses, all of them Seth's former victims. Seth attempts to rationalize his behavior, saying that he believes this place is the perfect home for everyone and that memories are like poison. To him, these women represent a twisted version of monogamy in an endless cycle. Jules, determined to free Margot from the house's control, returns to Margot's house to kill her father. Surprisingly, instead of resisting, her father urges Jules to go through with it. He is willing to sacrifice himself once again for Margot's sake. Back at the town center, Margot decides to fight back. In a bold move, she unlocks the cage holding Seth's family. The family members approach Seth and begin to consume his memories, leaving him drained and powerless. Witnessing this, Margot's father finally understands that he too poses a threat to his daughter. After dealing with Seth, Margot, Jules, and her father return home. Margot and Jules prepare to leave, but her father insists on sacrificing himself one final time. Margot reluctantly kills him with a knife, bringing the ordeal to an end. Margot and Jules finally reach the exit of the no-end house, and as the door slowly closes behind them, the story concludes. The story revolves around an urban legend about the no-end house, a structure that reappears in different locations every few years. Inside, there are 6 rooms, each with its own eerie and unsettling environment. It's said that no one has ever made it out of the 6th room. Margot and her friend Jules accept an invitation from Seth and JD to explore the house. Inside, Margot encounters her father, who had previously committed suicide, and learns from Dylan, who is searching for his wife, the secrets of the house. The house creates entities based on the memories of real people, and these entities feed on those memories. The group of 6 tries to escape, but along the way, JD, Dylan, and his wife are killed. Margot and Jules manage to escape the house temporarily, only to discover that Margot's father has followed them into the real world. Despite thinking the nightmare is over, Margot is dragged back into the house by her father. During this time, she falls in love with Seth, and a year passes. In the real world, Jules spends that year searching for the house and Margot. Eventually, everyone learns that Seth had been luring people to the house to feed it, and that he was a serial manipulator who had brought many women into the house, not just Margot. In the end, Margot's father chooses to help her escape, showing that despite being an entity created by her memories, he truly loves his daughter. The story closes with Margot and Jules finally leaving the no-end house. One lingering mystery is the nature of the sphere that Jules encounters. Although the show doesn't provide a clear explanation, there are two possible interpretations. The sphere's shape resembles an embryo, and Jules's emotional reaction could suggest it represents a child she lost in the past. Alternatively, it could symbolize Jules's guilt for abandoning Margot when she needed her most. The sphere repeatedly echoes the voicemail Margot left for Jules, and at one point, Jules calls out Margot's name before the sphere absorbs her. This can be seen as Jules being consumed by her guilt, only to break free and emerge as a stronger person who is determined to stand by Margot no matter what. Another question concerns the identity of the woman Dylan killed at the beginning of the story. She was, in fact, an entity he had created, wearing the same clothes she wore when they first met. Recognizing her immediately, Dylan didn't hesitate to kill her. Margot's search for the truth behind her father's death drives her to stay in the house, even at great personal risk. Despite being a creation of Margot's mind, her father's love for her remains genuine, and in the end, he is willing to sacrifice himself to protect her. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.